How do you even classify these two cars? The Toyota CHR and the Kia Soul are two not quite crossovers that are only available with front-wheel drive. But they are quirky looking, which helps them stand out in this world of all too similar looking cars. Simply put, these two cars love to live out loud. Let's start with the newer of these two cars, the Toyota CHR. This funky little thing was actually designed to be a Scion, and you can actually tell that it was meant to attract a younger demographic to the Toyota lineup. It's sporty looking and aggressive. Flared fenders give off that impression, and the roofline and dimensions give it a coupe-like look. In fact, the name hints at that. CHR stands for Coupe High Rider, which is as good as a description as any for this car. But don't be fooled, there are rear doors that are accessed by these well-hidden handles. There's no doubt that this car exudes personality, something that can't be said about many other Toyotas out there. You can also get it in a number of color finishes and even two-tone designs that really stand out. Jumping in and you'll notice that this car has just as much personality inside the car as it does on the outside. I love the layout of this car. It's very clean with just this infotainment system popping out in the center. There's also a really nice layout of buttons in the middle here. It's not overwhelming, but it does enough to remind you that you're in something that's unlike other cars on the road. There's a lot of soft touch materials inside this car that mask the fact that this is just a $25,000 vehicle. And I like the design of some of the harder stuff. The A-pillars are also really thin, which improves forward visibility. However, this infotainment system could be better. It doesn't come with Android Auto or Apple CarPlay, and you can't get this car with navigation at all. The seats are really well bolstered and supportive, and there's a leather-wrapped steering wheel that feels really good too. It's a shame you can't get leather on the seats, but considering how hot it gets around this time of year, I'm okay with that omission. Further rounding out the features in the CHR, you get dual-zone climate control, push-button start, heated seats, and a small rear-view camera that's integrated into the mirror. For as small as the CHR is, it can be fairly hospitable for passengers. Believe it or not, the car has 1 more inch of rear headroom than the Soul, but is down significantly in legroom when compared to the Kia. The car will work in a pinch for transporting adults, but is probably best for kids and pets. There's a limited amount of cargo space with just 19 cubic feet that expands to 36.4 cubic feet when you fold the rear seats. The hatch opening is pretty big though. Now these two cars aren't really comparable, but they're both billed as practical cars that you can get for around $25,000. And the CHR is actually a lot of fun to drive. A lot of that has to do with the new TNGA architecture, which actually has spent some time in development on the Nürburgring. What I mean to say is this car isn't exactly a sports car, but it is much more engaging and fun to drive than any crossover has any right to be. The steering's actually really good, something I wasn't expecting in a cheap compact like this. And the suspension is really good too. That has a lot to do with the independent rear suspension setup that this vehicle has, which is rare in small cars. Now, one thing that I wish lived up to the hype was the engine. There's just a 2-liter 4-cylinder engine that makes 144 horsepower and 139 pound-feet of torque, and it just isn't as much fun as the rest of the car is. In order to get going anywhere, you have to really put your foot down, and the car revs high, and it just buzzes, and it's just not a really good experience at all. The CVT takes a little bit of edge off the drivetrain. It's not particularly great, but it's not too bad either. It simulates gear changes when you put your foot into it. And there's a sport mode that helps you keep the RPMs nice and high so that you are always in the power band. However, if you don't want to drive this car as aggressively as it looks, you'll be rewarded with somewhat good fuel economy. This car gets 29 mpg, which isn't too bad, but then you remember it's just front-wheel drive. The value of the CHR really comes into play when you take into consideration all of the features that you get in this car. Now, it comes with adaptive cruise control, lane keep assist, blind spot monitoring, and forward collision warning. And all of that for a car that barely costs more than $25,000. Now, it's really cool that this car comes with all those features, but they could do with a little bit more refinement. Sometimes the lane keep assist or adaptive cruise control just seems a little off, as in it's hitting the brakes when it really shouldn't be. Still, I'm glad that this car comes with all those features, but it makes the decision to put the rear view camera display in the rear view mirror a really puzzling one. The camera could definitely show up on this big 7-inch touchscreen, and I don't know why they haven't done that. All in, you're looking to spend around $25,000, which isn't a bad deal when you consider everything that you get in this car. If the fake coupe crossover styling isn't up your alley, then maybe this is more your jam. Your orange marmalade jam in this case. Simply put, it's a box on wheels, but Kia has somehow managed to make this car still look cool. With 1 million sales out in the US, this car has outlived other boxy cars like the Honda Element and Nissan Cube, so don't tell me that this car isn't loved. A major part of all of this has to do with those crazy advertising campaigns that feature the dancing hamsters. The Soul stands out and has presence like few cars really do. Jumping into the Soul, you'll notice that even though it sits really high up, it doesn't require a big step to get into. That's a small thing that goes a long way. And as interesting as the exterior of this car is, the interior is just not as expressive. In fact, if it wasn't for the speaker grills and the orange stitching, you'd probably think this is any other Kia. But those speaker grills actually light up and change colors based on the beat of the music, which is something I've never seen in a car before. And this car features a Harman Kardon system that sounds pretty good too. However, if you're expecting more features and luxuries in this car, you might be a little disappointed. There's no dual zone climate control, but there are heated seats in the front and rear, as well as a heated steering wheel. Kia also offers Android Auto and Apple CarPlay, and there's a quick charge USB port in the armrest. The touchscreen is a bit easier to use, and I love the ability to rewind live satellite radio stations on this car. Without a doubt, the Soul makes its impression with its clever use of space. There's much more legroom in the car, and it feels like a much more appropriate choice for families. But the cargo space is incredible, especially due to the boxy and practical design of the trunk. There's 24.2 cubic feet that expands to over 60 cubes when the rear seats are down. As soon as you start driving this car, all of the confidence from driving a boxy car that looks this cool comes to life. And a lot of that has to do with the powertrain. Under the hood is a 1.6-liter turbocharged 4-cylinder that makes 201 horsepower and 195 pound-feet of torque. It feels really quick and powerful, especially in comparison to the Toyota CHR. And this engine has been used in various cars throughout the Hyundai Kia lineup, and there's no complaints with it. It's a real winner. However, I really wish that this transmission could be more refined. Sometimes it's a bit too rough when changing gears or hesitant to change gears. And simply put, it's not nearly as well sorted out as other dual-clutch transmissions out there. I do wish there was an alternative to this 7-speed dual-clutch transmission, like, say, a manual transmission? That'd be a good idea. This 7-speed dual-clutch is designed to get you more fuel economy, and it gets 28 miles per gallon combined, which is just 1 mpg less than what you get in the CHR. The rest of the car is pretty good, although the steering and handling just can't compete with what you get in the Toyota. I do love the way that this car feels on the road, mainly due to the visibility. These windows are huge, and you can see almost everything that's going on around you. And speaking of big windows, this car has a massive sunroof. However, there are different drive modes, and using the Sport mode makes the transmission a bit more active, and that negates some of the issues I had with it. Now, I should spend some time and talk about the driver assistance features of this car, but simply put, there really isn't much to talk about. This car just has blind spot monitoring. Now that's kind of weird because we have the upgraded engine in this Soul, but other trim levels of the car come with more equipment, including smart cruise control and lane keep assist. But for a vehicle that costs $27,000, I would expect as much equipment as that CHR. As I said before, these two cars aren't really competitors, but they have a lot more in common than you'd think. They're both billed as practical, cool-looking cars for those on a budget. The Kia Soul has more power and more cargo space, while the Toyota CHR looks cool and is more fun to drive. Now, there's no real winner here, but if it was my money, I'd take the Toyota because I love the way it looks and I think it handles really well. Either way you look at it, these choices are great, especially when you take into consideration all of the boring cars with zero personality out there.